The grand ballroom of the Carlton estate shimmered with chandeliers and whispers. Crystal glasses clinked softly while violin strings floated above the chatter of the city's most polished crowd. Everyone was dressed like they had stepped out of a glossy magazine. Every fabric glittered, every smile rehearsed. At the far end of the hall, a young woman stepped in quietly through the side doors. Her name was Ella Monroe, 28, calm eyes, soft hands that carried the scent of fabric and thread. She wasn't on the guest list for glamour. She was there because she had designed the bride's dress. But that wasn't what they saw. Her own gown, simple, hand-stitched, pale lavender silk, didn't shine like the others. It had no designer label, no sequins, no price tag that made people gasp. It was elegant, understated, and old. The kind of dress that only someone who understood real craftsmanship could love. The whispers started as soon as she entered. Is she serious? That looks like something from a thrift shop. She must have borrowed it. Ella heard every word but kept walking, her posture steady. She smiled politely at a server who passed by, then made her way toward the back of the room, near the floral arch she'd helped arrange that morning. Across the ballroom, a group of bridesmaids, led by Vanessa Clark, the bride's glamorous cousin, spotted her and began to laugh. Vanessa, in a champagne gold gown that sparkled under the lights, leaned toward her friend. Who let the charity case in? Her friend giggled. Maybe she came to wash the dishes afterward. The laughter rippled. Ella pretended not to notice, her fingers brushing the hem of her dress. She'd made it herself years ago, when she couldn't afford anything new for her art school showcase. It wasn't meant to impress anyone here, but to remind her where she started. Still, the sting of their mockery sank deep. The bride, Clara, entered soon after, radiant, wearing the very dress Ella had designed for her. It was breathtaking. Soft ivory layers, embroidered by hand with silver thread, every stitch placed with love and care. The crowd gasped in awe, but nobody knew who had made it. Ladies and gentlemen, announced the host, please take your seats for dinner. As people shuffled toward the tables, Vanessa brushed past Ella, pretending to stumble so her drink nearly spilled. Oops. Be careful, sweetheart. Wouldn't want to ruin your vintage masterpiece, she sneered. Ella's lips curved slightly, not in anger but restraint. Don't worry, she said gently. Some things can't be ruined by cheap wine. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the calm confidence in her tone. But before she could answer, the band began playing and the newlyweds took their seats. Throughout dinner, Ella sat alone near the back, listening to laughter she wasn't part of. The more she looked around, the clearer it became. Money could buy polish but not grace. Across the table, an older man in a crisp navy suit noticed her sketchbook peeking out from her bag. You're not much of a talker, he said kindly. Designer. Ella nodded. Yes, sir. Dresses mostly. Independent. Yes. Small studio. Very small. He smiled. Well, all big houses start small. She thanked him quietly, unaware that this small exchange would matter more than she could ever imagine. As dessert was served, the MC took the stage. Before we move on to the dancing, we'd like to acknowledge the creative genius behind the bride's stunning gown. Ella froze mid-sip. The crowd murmured, heads turning toward Vanessa. Everyone assumed she would step up. After all, Vanessa worked as a PR manager for a luxury fashion house and often took credit for things she barely touched. But then Clara stood, holding the microphone, her smile warm and genuine. I want everyone to know, this dress was designed by someone who believed in me long before anyone else did. She didn't just make me a gown. She made me feel like myself again. She turned toward Ella. Ella Monroe, would you come up here, please? A hush swept through the hall. Vanessa's smirk vanished. Wait her. Ella rose slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as every eye turned to her. The same crowd that had laughed minutes ago now stared in silence. She walked toward the stage, her soft lavender dress catching the light. It wasn't shiny, but under the glow of the chandeliers, the fabric seemed to breathe, alive with quiet dignity. As she reached Clara, the bride hugged her tightly. "You saved my wedding," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ella smiled. "You would have. You always shine on your own." Clara turned back to the microphone. For those who don't know, Ella started her own design studio from nothing. No investors, no connections, just talent, grit, and heart. She's the reason this day feels like a dream. Applause spread through the room. Polite at first, then louder, then genuine. Vanessa's face flushed red. The older man who had spoken to Ella earlier stood and clapped the hardest. There was something in his expression, a mix of admiration and recognition, that made Ella pause. When the applause quieted, Clara smiled. "Ella, would you stay for a moment after the ceremony? There's someone who wants to meet you." Ella nodded, unaware that this meeting would change the course of her entire career. As the music swelled again and people returned to their conversations, Vanessa leaned over to a friend, voice dripping with bitterness. "She just got lucky. No one's ever going to take her seriously in that rag she's wearing." But luck had nothing to do with it. What was coming next, they wouldn't call it luck. They'd call it karma dressed in silk. The laughter echoed louder than the wedding music. Ella could still hear it. The whispering, the sideways glances, the cruel smirks that cut deeper than any blade. When she'd first stepped into the grand ballroom, she thought maybe she'd blend in. Maybe no one would notice that her dress wasn't designer-made, that her shoes had been re-dyed to look new. She'd been wrong. The moment Vanessa Clark, the bride's cousin and self-proclaimed fashion expert, spotted her, the humiliation began. "Oh my God," Vanessa said, voice sharp enough to pierce the music. "Ella Monroe, right? I didn't realize we were doing vintage charity chic tonight." A few people around her laughed. Others tried to hide their smiles. Ella forced a polite grin. "It's handmade." "Oh, I can tell," Vanessa replied, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "The uneven stitching really gives it that authentic thrift shop look." Her friends giggled. Even the waiter nearby looked uncomfortable. Ella's cheeks burned. She wanted to sink into the marble floor, to disappear behind the buffet table, anywhere but here. But she stood tall. "Actually," she said softly, "I designed it myself." That silenced them for a beat. Then Vanessa let out a laugh so loud the bride herself turned to look. "You designed it?" she said between laughs. "Oh, that's adorable. Maybe next time try Pinterest before you play dress up." Ella smiled faintly, though her heart was breaking. "Enjoy the wedding, Vanessa." Then she walked away, pretending she didn't hear the whispers that followed. Later that evening, as the ceremony ended and the guests mingled, Ella found herself near the back of the ballroom, sitting at an empty table. The room glittered, chandeliers, champagne, silk gowns, but all she could see was the reflection of her dress in the mirrored wall. It wasn't perfect. The hem was slightly uneven. The lace at the shoulders was old, repurposed from her mother's wedding dress. But it was hers. Every thread, every stitch carried her story. The late nights, the tiny studio apartment, the years she'd spent working as a seamstress for designers who never remembered her name. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up. A tall man in a dark gray suit stood beside her, holding a drink. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with silver at his temples and eyes that saw too much. "Go ahead," Ella said. He sat down, glancing at her dress, but not the way others had. His gaze wasn't mocking. It was observant, almost curious. "You made that?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. It's beautiful," he said simply. "Raw. Real. You don't see that kind of honesty in design anymore." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Most people think it looks old." He smiled. That's because most people don't know the difference between fashion and art. Ella tilted her head. And you do, he chuckled. I try to. I run a small company that works with new designers. I've been watching the people in this room for an hour. You're the only one wearing something made from the heart. She smiled for the first time that night. Thank you. But I doubt your company's looking for someone like me. You might be surprised, he said, handing her his business card. Richard Bennett. Bennett Atelier. The name struck her like lightning. She'd heard it before, a design powerhouse, the kind of company that shaped entire trends. Her breath caught. You're that Richard Bennett? He nodded casually. Last time I checked. Before she could respond, Vanessa appeared again, her laughter slicing through the air. Oh, Ella, there you are. Are you networking now? With designers? That's adorable. Richard turned, his voice cool. You must be Miss Clark. Vanessa blinked. Yes. I've heard of you, he said. Influencer, right? You posted that luxury look on a budget reel last month. Her face brightened instantly. Yes, that was me. I remember the comments, he said. They called it, what was it? Oh, right. A masterclass in pretension. The smile fell from her face. Excuse me? Richard stood. If you'll excuse us, Miss Monroe and I were having an intelligent conversation about design. Something I suspect you wouldn't understand. And with that, he offered Ella his hand. Care to dance? She hesitated, then took it. The crowd turned as they stepped onto the dance floor. A few whispered, others stared. But for once, Ella didn't care. The chandeliers shimmered above them, reflecting in her eyes as the music swelled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel poor. She felt seen. After the dance, Richard leaned close and said quietly, Come by my office Monday. Bring some of your sketches. I think it's time the world stopped laughing and started listening. Ella looked up, stunned. You mean it? He smiled. Every word. As she watched him walk away, the whispers of mockery were gone. All she could hear now was the faint hum of possibility. But not everyone in that ballroom was ready to see her rise. Vanessa stood by the bar, eyes burning with jealousy. She'll regret this, she muttered under her breath. No one humiliates me in my own circle and gets away with it. Her friend leaned in. What are you going to do? Vanessa smiled coldly. Oh, I'll find a way, because girls like her don't belong in our world, and I'll make sure she remembers it. Outside, under the pale glow of the streetlight, Ella took a deep breath. She looked up at the night sky and whispered, Maybe this is where everything changes. She had no idea how right she was, or how much the next chapter would test her strength, her dignity, and her heart. Because sometimes the dress they laugh at becomes the legacy they envy. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the small studio where Ella worked. A converted attic that smelled of linen, paint, and brewed coffee. Rolls of fabric leaned against the wall like soldiers awaiting orders, and a half-finished gown rested on the mannequin near the window. She ran her fingers across the fabric, feeling its softness. The applause from the night before echoed faintly in her mind. For a moment, she let herself smile. Then her phone buzzed. A known number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. A calm, deep voice replied. Miss Monroe? This is Richard Bennett. We met briefly at the wedding last night. Ella straightened. Oh, Mr. Bennett. Yes, of course. I was wondering, he continued, if you'd have time to meet this afternoon. I'd like to discuss something professional. Her heart skipped. Professional? He chuckled. Nothing scary, I promise. Let's say 3 p.m. My office, Bennett Design Holdings. Do you know it? Her throat tightened. Everyone in the fashion industry knew that name. They were one of New York's largest design distributors, partners with half the luxury brands she dreamed of working for. Yes, she managed. I know it. Excellent. See you then. The call ended. Ella stared at her phone for a long moment, the reality settling in like sunlight on cool glass. By 2:45 p.m., she stood in front of the glass tower on Madison Avenue. The doorman smiled as he opened the door. "Miss Monroe? They're expecting you." She stepped into the lobby, marble floors, soft jazz, quiet elegance. So different from her cluttered studio, yet somehow, she didn't feel small. An assistant escorted her up to the 18th floor. Richard Bennett's office was lined with framed sketches, decades of artistry frozen in black ink and gold frames. He rose as she entered, offering his hand. "Ella, glad you could come. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Bennett." "Richard, please." He gestured for her to sit. "I watched you last night. Not just your work, how you carried yourself when those people whispered. That's rare." Ella blushed slightly. "I just tried not to make a scene. That restraint," he said, leaning back, "is what separates amateurs from professionals." He opened a folder on his desk. Inside was a printed photo of Clara's gown, her design. "This," he said, tapping the photo, "is exquisite. I've seen hundreds of bridal collections, and few achieve this level of detail without losing simplicity. You have vision." Ella's throat tightened. "Thank you. I'm launching a new line under Bennett Atelier Modern, handcrafted couture. I need someone who understands authenticity. I want you to design it." Her heart stopped. "Me? Yes, you." He smiled. "You'll have full creative control. I'll handle distribution, marketing, and finances. You focus on the art." She blinked. I don't even have a proper team." "Then we'll build one." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The offer felt too large, too surreal. "I need to think about it," she whispered. Richard nodded. "Of course. Take your time. Just know that opportunities like this don't knock twice." As she rose to leave, he added softly, "You remind me of someone. My mother. She was a seamstress. People used to laugh at her too, until they started wearing her work." Ella smiled faintly. "Then I'll try to honor that legacy." When she left the building, the world seemed brighter, the noise of the city more alive. She didn't know that Vanessa Clark, still bitter from the night before, was watching her from across the street, sunglasses hiding her scowl. Later that week, Vanessa stormed into her cousin Clara's office. "You hired her?" she demanded. Clara blinked. "Ella? No. But I did recommend her to a few clients." "You can't be serious. She's an amateur. She stitched that wedding dress like a project for art class." Clara's tone sharpened. "That project made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. You could learn something from her." Vanessa's face twisted. "You really think she'll last in this industry? Please. One lucky break and she thinks she's Coco Chanel." But that lucky break was already turning into something far more dangerous: momentum. Within a month, photos of Ella's work appeared in boutique magazines. Local brides requested fittings. Then came an invitation to an exclusive fashion showcase, sponsored by none other than Bennett Atelier. Back in her small studio, Ella worked late into the night. The hum of the sewing machine filled the silence. On the wall above her desk hung a single line she'd written years ago. "Don't design to impress them. Design to express you." She was finally doing exactly that. But beneath the joy was a shadow, a whisper that the same people who had laughed at her were still out there, waiting for her to fail. And one of them, Vanessa, was already plotting her downfall. By the time the showcase invitation arrived, Ella's hands were trembling. She would be presenting her first official collection at the Grand Avenue Pavilion, the same venue where she'd once stood in a thrift shop dress, humiliated in front of the city's elite. Fate had a wicked sense of timing. As she looked out the window that night, the city lights reflected on her glass panes like stars. For the first time, she didn't feel like the outsider looking in. She was the storm coming through the door. The Grand Avenue Pavilion was already glowing with light when Ella arrived. The glass dome sparkled beneath the afternoon sun, and photographers lined the red carpet, shouting names that belonged in magazines, not in her quiet world of thread and needles. But this time, Ella didn't sneak in through the back door. She was the one they were waiting for. "Ella Monroe," said a staff member, checking her badge with a grin. "Your collection is getting a lot of buzz, ma'am. People are calling it the Cinderella line." She smiled softly. "Fitting name, don't you think?" Her assistant, a bright young intern named Rosie, rolled in the rack of dresses. 10 pieces, each one telling a part of her journey. The fabrics shimmered with soft ivory, sky blue, muted silver, elegant, pure, unpretentious. Each dress was sewn by hand, with her signature technique, hidden stitches that made every gown look like it floated. As she made final adjustments backstage, she heard familiar laughter echoing from behind the curtain. Vanessa Clark. Of course, she was here, PR badge hanging around her neck, chatting loudly with journalists, dressed in a metallic gold jumpsuit that screamed confidence and bitterness in equal measure. When Vanessa spotted Ella, her smirk widened. "Oh my God, you're here? Cute. Playing designer again, I see." Ella didn't rise to the bait. She adjusted the hem of her model's gown, calm and focused. "Good to see you, Vanessa. You sure you're ready for this?" Vanessa sneered. "This isn't some local boutique. Real designers are showing today. You'll be lucky if anyone remembers your name." Ella looked up, her eyes calm but sharp. "They already do." For a second, Vanessa's smile faltered. The lights dimmed. The music started, soft piano, then rising strings. One by one, Ella's designs walked down the runway. The audience leaned forward, whispering. They had come expecting another inspired newcomer. What they saw instead was mastery in motion. Each dress told a story. The struggle of being overlooked, the elegance of resilience, the quiet power of a woman who refused to shrink. By the time the final model stepped onto the runway, wearing the lavender gown Ella had once worn to that wedding, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Then the standing ovation. It was overwhelming, thunderous, sincere. Backstage, Rosie was crying. "They loved it, Ella. You did it." Ella could barely breathe. For the first time in her life, she wasn't fighting to be seen. She was the vision everyone was watching. But just as she stepped out to take her bow, chaos rippled through the crowd. Vanessa was standing near the press pit, waving her phone. "She's a fraud," she shouted. The room went dead quiet. Cameras turned. "She didn't design these," Vanessa continued. "She copied them from an old European collection. I have proof." Ella froze. Her chest tightened. Vanessa handed her phone to a journalist, showing side-by-side images. The designs were similar, or at least made to look that way. Someone had clearly tampered with the photos, adjusting colors and angles. Reporters began whispering. The audience murmured. Richard Bennett, seated in the front row, stood up slowly. "Enough!" The entire hall fell silent again. He walked to the stage, his voice calm but commanding. "Miss Clark, I've seen Miss Monroe's design process firsthand. Every draft, every pattern, every stitch. These accusations are false." Vanessa's voice trembled. I was just..." Richard cut her off. "You were just trying to humiliate someone who rose above you." Again, gasps rippled through the crowd. He turned to the journalists. "If you'd like proof, come by my office tomorrow. We'll show you every original sketch, time-stamped and registered under Bennett Atelier." Vanessa's face drained of color. "You can't." "Oh, I can," Richard said firmly. "And as for you, Miss Clark, you may want to call your employer before they hear about this from me." The security guards gently escorted her out. Ella stood frozen as the applause returned, louder now, fueled by vindication. Richard leaned close and whispered, "Never let jealousy dictate your story, Ella. You've earned this moment." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. When she stepped forward again to take her bow, the lights glowed brighter, the same lavender gown shining under daylight streaming through the glass ceiling. This time the world saw what they had missed before. Not a poor girl with a hand-stitched dress, but a designer who had sewn her soul into every thread. Backstage, a flood of journalists and buyers crowded around her. One of them, a young woman with a mic, asked, "Ella, how does it feel to silence the people who once mocked you?" Ella smiled softly. "I didn't come to silence anyone. I came to prove that you don't need permission to create beauty. Even if they laugh first, one day they'll clap." The crowd erupted with applause again. Later that evening, Richard joined her in the quiet dressing area. "You handled that with grace," he said. "I almost lost it," she admitted. "That's the point," he said, smiling. "You didn't. And that's what makes you unstoppable." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a contract, official partnership papers, her own design line under Bennett Atelier, launching worldwide. "This," he said, "is your real beginning." Ella stared at the paper, speechless. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Richard chuckled. She did, with tears in her eyes. And as she signed, the pen trembling slightly, she realized this wasn't revenge. It was redemption. Outside, in the cool evening light, she looked up at the sky above the glass pavilion. The same sunlight that once exposed her embarrassment now illuminated her triumph. Tomorrow the headlines would read, "Unknown designer steals the show, from laughter to legacy." But Ella didn't care about headlines. She cared about the work, the art, the quiet dignity of creation. And somewhere, perhaps at another wedding or fashion event, someone would whisper again, "Isn't that the girl they laughed at?" And someone else would reply, "Yes. And now the world wears her name." Morning sunlight poured through the wide windows of the Bennett Atelier headquarters, bathing everything in gold. A year had passed since the night that changed Ella Monroe's life, the night she went from whispered mockery to global recognition. But fame hadn't changed her. It had only made her quieter, more deliberate. Her new workspace was nothing like the cramped attic where she'd once sketched under a flickering lamp. Now it was a sleek, sunlit studio filled with laughter, music, and the rhythmic hum of sewing machines. Bolts of fabric in every color stretched along the walls, and her small team of young designers, each one handpicked by Ella herself, moved with passion and purpose. Rosie, now her lead assistant, looked up from a table scattered with sketches. "You've got an interview at 10, a fitting at noon, and a call with Paris at 2. Ella smiled. "So a quiet day, then." They both laughed. But in truth, she loved the chaos. Every stitch, every meeting, every dream that came through the door. It was all part of something bigger, something she had built from scratch. That afternoon, she stood on the balcony outside her office, coffee in hand, watching the city pulse below. The skyline shimmered in the light, sharp, alive, endless. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Richard Bennett. "Your new collection launch is breaking pre-order records. Proud of you." She smiled. "Couldn't have done it without you," she texted back. But deep down she knew she had, because when she first walked into that wedding hall years ago, all she had were her hands, her heart, and a dream stitched together with courage. Later that week, she received an invitation that made her pause. A charity gala hosted by Westbridge Academy, the very venue where her designs had first been mocked. She almost declined. Almost. But something in her wouldn't let her. And so, the following Saturday, she stepped once more through those grand glass doors. Only this time, her name was printed at the top of the guest list. The same chandeliers still hung above the ballroom. The same marble floors gleamed under her heels. But the air was different. People smiled when they saw her. Some even approached for photos. Across the room, she spotted a familiar face. Vanessa Clark. Gone was the gold jumpsuit and smug confidence. Vanessa worked PR for a smaller fashion house now. When their eyes met, Vanessa froze, unsure whether to smile, run, or apologize. Ella walked up to her. "Vanessa," she said softly. "Ella." Vanessa's voice trembled. I never apologized for what I did. You didn't deserve that." Ella nodded. "You're right. I didn't." Vanessa lowered her eyes. "You probably hate me." "I don't," Ella said simply. "I just learned that not everyone who laughs deserves an explanation." For a long second, they stood in silence. Then Ella extended her hand. "I'm hosting an internship program this summer for underprivileged designers who want to learn. If you know anyone, or want to recommend someone, let me know." Vanessa blinked, surprised. "You'd let me be part of that?" "I'd let anyone try again," Ella said. "Even people who once doubted me." And with that, she smiled and walked away. That night, as the gala continued, the host took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have a special presentation. Tonight's charity drive raised over $2 million for the Fashion Access Foundation, and our largest donation came from someone whose journey embodies what this cause is about." He gestured toward Ella. Ella Monroe, designer, mentor, and inspiration to countless women who once thought their dreams were too small. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Ella stood, graceful and composed, but her mind drifted back to the laughter, the whispers, the moment she nearly broke. And suddenly it didn't hurt anymore, because this was what triumph looked like. Not revenge, not arrogance, but peace. Back at her studio days later, she found herself alone. The city outside glowed in the late afternoon sun. She sat at her old sewing table, the same one she'd used before anyone knew her name. A box rested beside her. Inside were pieces of fabric from her first ever lavender dress. She smiled as she touched them, the soft threads worn but unbroken. She picked up her sketchbook and began to draw. A new design, one that felt both past and future at once. The lines flowed easily, like memories finding their way home. Rosie peeked in. "You're still working?" "Always," Ella said softly. "This one's special." "What's it for?" Ella looked up and smiled. "It's for the girl they laughed at." Weeks later, that gown, a reimagined version of the lavender dress, walked the runway in Paris. The crowd rose to its feet again, but Ella barely heard them. She was watching from backstage, hands clasped, eyes glistening. Because for her, the true victory had happened long before this, the moment she stopped seeking approval and started sewing her truth. The final model reached the end of the runway, turned, and paused under the spotlight. The lights brightened to daylight tones, warm, soft, radiant. And there, projected behind her on the screen, were the words, "Designed by Ella Monroe," for everyone they said wasn't enough. Outside the venue, reporters swarmed. A journalist asked, "Ella, what's your secret to success?" She smiled gently. "Kindness, patience, and a thread strong enough to hold your heart together when the world tries to tear it apart." That night, as Paris lights glittered over the Seine, Ella sat by the river, sketchbook in hand. A cool breeze lifted her hair. Across the water, she saw her reflection shimmering, confident, calm, free. The girl who once walked into a ballroom wearing a handmade dress was gone. In her place stood a woman who had turned ridicule into art. And somewhere out there, in a small studio or a crowded city, another dreamer would read her story and whisper to herself, "If she could do it, maybe I can too."